What is up, fam? Nick Lasky here, your astrologer, and I wanted to share a lot about Uranus going into Gemini. And most specifically, I feel compelled to make a video about this and share the most important things that I think you need to know that will be really helpful in navigating this whole 7-year journey with Uranus and Gemini, and especially this first little entrance of Uranus and Gemini of the summer and the beginning of the fall of this year, 2025. So, this video is going to be breaking down the key themes about Uranus and Gemini, patterns and trends to expect. I'm going to share some predictions. I'm also definitely going to share how I would recommend preparing or the best way to navigate and work with this energy, because it is really wild, it's really erratic, and really amazing in terms of the breakthroughs and advancements that we'll be seeing as a society, and all the crazy at the same time. And of course, we cannot take this in a vacuum because it is concurrent with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, which is a huge thing, maybe the dark night of the soul of humanity that we're journeying through these 2 years, and Pluto being in Aquarius. And in fact, Uranus entering into Gemini is creating a trine, or 120 degree, makes a perfect triangle. If you were to fill in a third point in the sky in the sign of Libra, the other air sign, it would make a perfect triangle with Uranus and Pluto. And so a trine is a relationship of amazing support and flowing energy. So Pluto and Uranus are working really well in tandem to support what each other wants to do during this period. So let's start. Uranus, let's just break it down step by step. So the archetype of Uranus is the revolutionary. It is the game changer. It is the rebel. It is shocking energy. It is surprising energy and events. It is the urge to break free from limitations, to break free from old paradigms. It is, really associated with the archetype of Prometheus, the god who stole fire from Olympus and brought it down to the humans. Zeus got real pissed off about that. But basically, it's that paradigm shifting energy. Okay? And it that clearly shows up all the time with Uranus, with technology. Uranus is associated with technology, with disruptions, okay, literally with riots and revolutions and things that shift the paradigm. And not slowly, but very quickly, like a lightning strike. In an esoteric yogic perspective, Uranus is Kundalini, and it represents the lightning strike of Kundalini or illumination. So that's the Uranian energy. It's not subtle. It's very loud. It tends to be very dramatic, very sudden, and in its best creates breakthroughs or quantum leaps that in a personal sense that allow us to really upgrade into a new level of being. Now let's talk about the sign of Gemini. So Uranus for the past 7 years has been in Taurus, and from 2025 to 2023 is entering the sign of Gemini. Gemini is, of course, the twins. So Gemini actually is associated with siblings, but on a more mundane, practical sense, Gemini rules things like communication, short distance travel, also is associated with technology, data, information, speech. Gemini is all of the go back and forth between things kind of energy. It also rules social norms, the way we communicate, the way we conversate, the way we do our human thing in a verbal exchange or in a spatial exchange. So Uranus going into Gemini is really, there's a lot that Uranus and Gemini have in common, which means that Uranus will be quite effective in doing the Uranian impulse of revolutionizing and breaking free that it really wants to do. Okay, it was a little more stifled in the sign of Taurus, earthly plotting Taurus, that's like fixed and steady, but is not as adaptable and changeable, not as into like a revolution and like huge game-changing paradigms. Gemini's into it. Gemini's about it, right? So expect more rapid shifts. Expect more over this period, like society, how we interface with each other, with life. Like I'm recording this on my phone. We have smartphones that are connected to data or Wi-Fi, and the data is, we're getting internet service or access through satellites. And so all of these technologies that really shift the ways that we communicate, we can look back historically to other periods of Uranus being in Gemini and see Uranus and Gemini are significant periods where there's been major technological breakthroughs, especially in communication, but also periods where technologies that were already created suddenly become widespread, adopted in a widespread manner. Okay, like it just proliferates and goes everywhere. And so some really amazing examples are the telegraph, the first computer, which was technically called the ENIAC, which was considered the first digital electronic programmable computer created during Uranus and Gemini. We can also look at the widespread proliferation of television, even radio, radar, all these military technologies, like really rapidly advanced during the Uranus and Gemini eras. And so it's really, I would expect one of the biggest things that we're going to see over these next 7 years is the way that we communicate is going to look differently. How fast we're able to communicate. Like if we look at some of the technologies that have been around, like the metaverse or these other augmented virtual reality things, I believe in some way they're going to shift into being much more incorporated into our daily realities. Holograms, for instance, projecting yourself, or even, astral projecting to meet somebody, right? Let's say a tech company builds a technology, a program that allows you to literally meet somebody in some space of your choosing where it really feels real. What if that's a reality? I would bet Uranus and Gemini either is going to be birthed or that's going to become a thing. Also, the short distance travel part, all right? So extremely disruptive technologies and game-changing shifts and innovations to the way we travel. So one of the ones that we see now are automated driving. The digital, the driverless cars, robo-taxis, the way that we travel around like that, totally going to take off, I would bet. Also, flying cars, okay, or traveling in the air. Both Uranus and Gemini are associated with the air. So one of the biggest things I really think is our airspace is going to look differently. It's going to be revolutionized. What's moving through the air? Drones, and that playing out in warfare, but also in just practical delivering things. Drones are going to be really this like much more developed technology. And one of the things that I'm hoping I would put a dollar in or a coin in the slot for is, if you remember in Back to the Future, Marty McFly had that skateboard that was like a hoverboard, right? So hovercrafts, and in the big kind of dramatic, like a car, but could also just be on very practical for fun for kids, for transporting like on a hoverboard like Marty McFly. Also, aerospace technology, planes. I really think that there's going to be major disruptions and shifts in that industry and the way we travel in planes, and potentially some really intense experiences or disasters that could bring about the necessity for upgrading technology and upgrading the planes or the way we do that. There could be some catalyzing events that like precipitate that. But nevertheless, so think of both the disruption and the technological leap. Oftentimes they go hand in hand, but sometimes the disruption is really felt first, that becomes a necessity for the the technological leap and the upgrade. One of the other big things is satellites. Okay, so satellites are totally woven in Uranus and Gemini, and such. It's just one of the quintessential things that I really believe represents Uranus and Gemini, because Uranus is a sky god, is up in the sky, is up in space. Gemini is about communication, exchange back and forth of data and information. So there could be big disruptions with satellites. There's been a lot of talk about how that is maybe a weak spot for the United States, or one of the sensitive places, or, like, what happens if the satellites conk out? What happens if things shift with satellites? Because so much of our infrastructure, of the way we live our lives right now, is built on that. Internet, Wi-Fi, connectivity, phones. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was big disruptions, unexpected disruptions in those areas, as well as technological breakthroughs that happen there. So let me see. There are some, if we look historically, one of the best ways of really understanding a transit is looking at what happened historically. And so if we look at the past few times that Uranus has been in Gemini, it's also really been associated with major development of weapons, technology that is used in warfare. Okay, and we're seeing this already on the precipice with drones being really strongly used in warfare, but I think we're just only on the very precipice of that. But it is also war creates development of technology that then after war gets implemented and used in different ways. And one of the previous times in the late 1800s that this really happened was during the Civil War with railroads. Railroads really, for sure, existed before the Civil War, but in the United States, they suddenly were implemented in a really big way to transport people, troops, ammunition, weapons, etc. And they, built these big transcontinental railroads here, also in Russia at the same time. And so look to technologies that are being used in wars for, mundane, practical, domestic purposes or logistical purposes being implemented. I'm going to come to some very significant things in a moment. I just want to cover if there's any other big technology stuff that I definitely want to. Here's another juicy one, is about information. Uranus represents freedom and sovereignty and liberation. Gemini rules information and data. So we could just literally play some Mad Libs and put some words together of freedom of information, freedom of data, right? Our digital sovereignty, our data online, all these things are going to really take hold in some new way, and maybe some very strange ways, with digital avatars and AI. And of course, AI is totally woven in with all of this, and AI being one of the biggest disruptors of industries, of social lives, of, education. If we look historically, we can also see that education has been, each of the past 3 times, big shifts and tweakings and interest in how we do education as a society, especially in this country, in the United States. There are education reforms every time Uranus goes into Gemini. And it's easy to see how with, AI, how that could develop, and, personalized education and different ways in which technology can really work with, not only just children, but adults in how we learn things. I mean, one of the other big things that I would say is about to take off is the whole brain technology interfacing, neuro digital interfaces. How does that unfold when technology and our brain get connected and in really beautiful, cool ways, maybe with prosthetic limbs and Suddenly, someone who doesn't have an arm now has a mechanical robot arm, and that's amazing. And they develop some sovereignty and autonomy back with that, and different things with the brain. So all kinds of technologies that bring those two things together are really about to take off. I mean, I would love personally, in the Matrix when Neo's just like, yeah, I know Kung Fu, and you just plug in Kung Fu, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Aikido, all the different things. Like, what if I could, if we could just plug in French or Spanish or, Dutch. And we are seeing that in terms of the way we communicate. And part of that is totally going to be the AI and the ability of our phones or technologies to communicate in different languages in real time, in really slick and easy ways. It is just one of the dangers, one of the pitfalls, I would say, of this period is how rapidly changing technologies get adopted, and then we don't realize the detrimental impacts of them until after the fact, such as smartphones and social media addiction. That suddenly everyone, now is all over. I was like, oh, this is really dangerous, and oh, maybe we should have thought about that before we adopted it. Well, technology just kind of takes off, and it takes a lot to really maintain things, especially in like a technology arms race kind of vibe. So, being aware of our human values and not making ourselves dumber or way more dependent on technology, I think it's very important. We can use technology in beautiful and creative ways, but they can also really destroy aspects of the very things that make us human. So that's a really important thing to pay attention to. Practically, politically, it's a very chaotic time right now for so many different reasons. I mean, the astrology is already here. We got the, Neptune-Saturn conjunction really playing out in big dramatic ways. But Uranus going into Gemini is a pretty polarizing energy, and we're already very polarized. Like all the different countries, different factions, different, us versus them, and which side are you on? I really believe that there will be an acceleration of that kind of energy of pick a side. Which side are you on? Gemini is like, which side? And in some instances it may be useful, but I would say in more instances it is not useful to polarize and to other people or to a group of people, or a country, or we are all really one species, one human family. And so I think it's really important as we go into this energy, where like the energy is just going to be real intense. Like it's just a heightened, peaking kind of energy. How can we stay centered and not get swept away in some narratives that are not our own, that are fed to us? Or this is a big one that ties in with Uranus and Gemini. Where are you getting your information? Where are you getting your truth? Where are you getting, your facts or your data that you're making your decisions from? We can also look historically at the past several times Uranus has been in Gemini, and each time major shifts and evolutions with journalism and media. So we're also going to see that too. Like I really believe there'll be a renaissance in terms of journalism, and we're already seeing that, but I think it'll take off in new ways with individuals being journalists. We're already seeing in many ways the decline of not only just big box stores, but like big box media, and people getting their news and media from either social media or podcasts or just different outlets. And so at the same time as Saturn and Neptune are conjunct in Aries, which is a real big energy of like, what's real? What can I trust? What is fantasy? What is fiction versus what is truth? I see some technologies or, just shifting ways that where you get your information becomes a really important thing. And even some people speak about different timelines happening at the same time. Different people in different realities or timelines or experiences of life. And I think that's about to be super real. People just living in totally different worlds. And it's because they're fed propaganda or stories or realities that are just this version of reality, and other people are on this version of reality, and fewer people, hopefully much more people, are seeing the full bigger picture of reality. And in fact, another theme of the Uranus and Gemini periods historically has been propaganda. Propaganda and using messages, communications to provoke revolutions or to create change that people want to make. So, all right, I wanted to acknowledge now something very practical, which is and related to our health, mental health especially, but also physiological, physical, emotional health. Uranus rules electrical surges. Gemini rules our nervous system. So a very simple way of putting it is our nervous systems, the collective nervous system, is about to get a big jolt of energy. And that looks like overstimulation. And hey, guess what? We're already way overstimulated and bombarded, with marketing, with social media, and with blah, 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 all these kinds of things. So I would highly bet it's about to way pick up. The intensity of electrical energy on our nervous system. You remember, in the pandemic, how intense that time was, and the fight or flight kind of energy, like you don't know what's real, what to do, what to trust, what to do. And so it is very important that we all have tools, practices that ground us. Because just like with electrical wire, electricity, when you have too much electrical energy, you need to ground it. It needs a place to ground. Otherwise, it becomes very damaging. So how do you ground? How do you plug back into the earth? It's very, very important because this could easily be a time where, the mental health crisis or epidemic that we have right now just kind of like really spirals into crazy ways. So making sure you ground, making sure you have practices that regulate, that soothe, that balance your nervous system. It's extremely important on a very practical, mundane level. Okay, so I want to talk now about the history with the United States and Uranus and Gemini because it is real wild, y'all. So, the United States, if we look at the most popular chart of the United States, yes, countries have astrology charts, that is a time that is referred to as the Sibley chart on July 4th, 1776, which has the United States as Sagittarius rising, which means that Gemini is in the 7th house of relationships. Okay? So, we also have Uranus in Gemini. All right, so that means that Uranus coming back into Gemini is the United States' Uranus return. And this is extremely significant, especially if we look historically at our previous Uranus returns and Uranus in Gemini periods, because our country was founded in a Uranus in Gemini period. Well, that sparked off the Revolutionary War. Okay, and we talk about revolution, and literally there's nothing more like the perfect quintessential embodiment of Uranus and Gemini is a declaration of independence. Gemini, declaration, independence, Uranus. Okay, so our founding documents, the important documents, and potential shifts or like evolution, reestablishing these things, that's totally coming up in this period. But so we had the Revolutionary War and all the huge shifts, the ideological shifts of a country founded, in the way that ours was. That was in the 1700s. Then we go to the next time that Uranus was in Gemini, and I can even give you the exact dates. So 1775, 1782. That was the first one. Also, it coincided with the Enlightenment. The big focus on logic and reason and rationing and all that rationality in Europe. Then 1858 to 1866. Okay, any of those dates sound familiar? That was when we had the American Civil War. All right, and that was also a crisis or a war of ideas. Okay, in regards to slavery, in regards to ideals in that regard. So that was a huge revolutionary period in this country, and even especially in the years following that, following the ending of the war. I mean, our country became a completely different country. But again, railroads, the first transatlantic telegraph was during that period. Mass market publishing happened at that time, where like suddenly books and newspapers and periodicals were spread in really, really big ways that they hadn't been done before. And literacy became like it took off in a new way at that time, people being able to read. And one of the other pieces that I want to just threads that I want to pull on for each of these Uranus and Gemini periods is actually women and women's empowerment and women's rights. Okay? During the Revolutionary period, there was a big focus that Abigail Adams had, who was the wife of John Adams, and not forgetting the women in what he was doing in crafting some of these founding documents. If we look at the late 1850s and 1860s, that was a period where Susan B. Anthony and Katie Stanton and some of these and even Florence Nightingale, who I believe was like built basically the profession of nursing in, I think in Russia and Crimea or something like that. But each time Uranus goes into Gemini, there's a big step forward in the social norms, in the rights and dynamics with women, especially in this country, but also around the world. And that's one of the amazing things to really look forward to, is the equality consciousness that Uranus brings the revolution there. Then we go to the next time that Uranus was in Gemini, and that was 1941 to 1949, which marked the entrance of the United States into World War II. And World War II had already been going on, but it coincided within a few months after Uranus went into Gemini, the United States entered. And so we look at, just a huge development of technologies and code breaking and the first computer during that period, the atomic, research and age and the use of atomic weapons happened at that time. So there, already we're seeing the pretense or the emphasis of why the United States and Israel went into Iran being about nuclear weapons. We're already seeing nuclear weapons, this is a Uranus return from the first time that they were really developed and used. So in some way, they're going to be a key theme, hopefully in a very peaceful, using them kind of way. But the theme of them is in some way making a full circle from the time when they were first implemented. So prayers for that unfolding in diplomatic and conversational ways, which Gemini really can do and can focus on. Also, there was a huge explosion in radio, telephone, and television use and in the networks during that period in the 1940s that brought us basically to the information digital age that we're in now. If you think about it, so much was seeded from that, televisions, radios, computers, that's the world that we're living in now. Cool. So, historically, the past few times that Uranus has been in Gemini, since we've been a country, the United States has been in a major war. I don't believe that war is inevitable, though, it's in terms of like a major war unfolding for the United States, though, the U.S. Bombing Iran was certainly like warning signs potentially about things. However, I don't believe that the path is already written, that everything is already in motion. And so what we do know is associated with this transit is major disruption of social and cultural norms. Okay? And so revolution is going to happen. And, it's going to look real disruptive. At times, it's going to look real chaotic. And so that is why it is important that you have access to your center and to practices that bring you to your center so you are responsive and choosing how to respond rather than reacting and in fear or just in a kind of like state of intensity and just overwhelming your nervous system. So this is why I want to share the next segment, which is practices and recommendations for how to navigate and prepare for Uranus being in Gemini, which again starts on July 7th. And July 7th through November 8th, that's our window, that's our glimpse to really see. It's the first taste test, because then from November 8th to April 25th, that is a period where Uranus dips back into Taurus and we're closing up that energy. But July 7 to November 8 of 25, this is your time to really see how's this playing out in the world, how is this, and especially playing out in your personal life, in your family, with your friends, your community, in your professional life. I want you, if you can, to find out which house you have Taurus and which house you have Gemini in your birth chart. Find out the topics associated with Taurus, or associated with whatever house you have Taurus, okay? And then think about over the past 7 years, how have major shifts unfolded in those areas of my life? Well, Uranus has been in Taurus, whatever house that is. What big shifts, what big innovations, what breakthroughs, what big dynamic changes have unfolded? And you'll get to be able to see, okay, how some of these things can play out. But then pay attention, which house do you have Gemini? Over the next 7 years, that's where it's going to get this big surge of electricity and breakthrough and wanting to break free from old paradigms. Because surely, whatever house you have Taurus, you've seen a shift in paradigm over the last 7 years. About to get another shift in paradigm, but in a different topic of life. That's your Gemini house. Okay, so wrapping things up here, I have here robots. Robots. One other prediction that I want to mention is about robots really being integrated into everyday life. Kind of in the way that we see Star Wars and R2-D2 or C-3PO or these kind of like AI bots that, are just traveling with people. Like, that's going to be a thing. Our little AI or just robot companions that help with different things or help around the home, the smart homes and the things that are going to become normal place that were science fiction are totally robotic related. Emerging of ourself with digital and machine things. So, all right, let's talk about now preparing and navigating. One of the biggest keys I think that's most important, the muscle to have during this period, is adaptability. Okay, change is on the menu. Pluto, Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, like it's all these planets have entered into new signs. They're at the beginning of signs. The beginning entrance into a sign is a shift. It's a change in energy. But all of them have done it at the same time. So this is like an epoch change or a big era shift. So being adaptable to changes, not feeling like you need to do things the way they've always been done. If you're stuck in the way that things have always been, okay, this could be a real challenging time for you and your ego. Okay, so being open to change, being curious about change, being willing to embrace change rather than resist it, because the more that you resist necessary change that's just going to be happening, you're just going to suffer. And we can, just look at some simple business examples, right? Like books, bookstores, libraries, right? Well, then comes along Barnes and Noble. And suddenly, whoa, it's this huge, crazy, disruptive thing for the local independent bookstores. And then, whoa, comes along online bookstores and Amazon. And guess what? That totally has changed the game in books, right? So there are disruptive changes to probably most, but many industries, the ways we travel, the way we communicate. So if you are stuck in the old model, you could get left behind, or you could really just be suffering. So having an adaptability, I think, is really, really important. At the same time, having access and the ability to come to your center, as I mentioned before. How do you find calmness and stillness and unplug? Really, I mean, the intensity and the bombardment, in the news and what's unfolding, can be, social media, incredibly overwhelming. And so I don't believe that most of us are choosing the path of being a monk or a nun or a hermit and want to just detach from the world. And so I don't recommend that completely, and not doing things, because I do think action and applied action in the world and activism and doing things that are moving the energy, especially in ways that are meaningful and think globally, think locally, act globally, is something that I really like to think about in these kinds of times, right? It really doesn't help oftentimes to just complain about what's happening but not really doing something. But at the same time, getting caught up in the worry and the frenzy is just going to be debilitating, right? So unplugging at times, taking retreats, unplugging your Wi-Fi, put your phone on airplane mode, turn it off, from time to time, is going to be really helpful for regulating and balancing the nervous system. Community, family, close friends. Have a core group of people that you are connected with, that you can rely on, that that you will receive support from, and that you are committed to supporting. In the same way, pods started to emerge during the pandemic. Like, it's really important and good, and helps your nervous system, helps your mind, and literally in very practical survival ways. Like, having people, we are tribal people, a species that you can really trust and rely on, is incredibly important during this period. So if you don't have close friends, close family, close people, like, it's time to figure that out. Go to events, go meet people and really connect. It's very important that we are plugged in with each other, and can support each other and can rely on each other during times of uncertainty. Here's one. Question what is being told to you. I think we already spoke about this with, where you get your information and your truth and your facts. But you better believe that, AI videos and fake news and all kinds of propaganda and narratives are about to be rolling out. So developing the muscle of discernment and being able to take a deep breath before you accept something as truth, or looking deeper, checking sources, etc. Like, we have to really develop the ability to discern, to read between the lines during this period where we're going to be bombarded with stories and information. Using technology wisely. Okay, so as new technologies emerge, as amazing things we can do with these technologies unfold, like, adopt and adapt useful technologies in wonderful ways, but stay connected with your humanity and your values. Don't get lost. Don't lose yourself. Don't lose what is important to you. And for most of us, that's probably our time and our relationships, right? And our attention. At this time in history, like, our attention is a commodity. Our time, and relationships. It's so sad to see people that are so disconnected from humans because they're just plugged into the matrix, or plugged into digital things and social media and games, and just like, that feeds anxiety and loneliness and depression and mental health challenges. It really supports mental health. Hugs, laughing with people, eating meals with people, taking walks with people, being with people, So community and really making sure that we don't get lost in technology, I think, is really important during this period. And the final piece I will say, recommendation-wise, is the importance of moving energy. Exercise, working out, Tai Chi, Qigong, sports, anything that moves energy. Like, as Gemini rules the nervous system, at any time the nervous system gets overwhelmed with energy, with electricity, you got to move that energy. So you got to ground, but also, like, sedentary lifestyle is no good for Uranus and Gemini. And there's so much energy, it needs outlets. So find ways to have dance parties with yourself, dance with other people, but finding ways to move is going to be really, really important in staying balanced during this time. So I hope that this has been helpful. I could talk for so much more about Uranus and Gemini. It's such an immense topic. But the really juicy, useful thing I want you to pay attention to is from July 7 to November 8, pay attention. That is our glimpse, the first glimpse of Uranus and Gemini, globally and personally. So really pay attention to that. And yeah, if you have any questions, type a comment, send me a message. I do plan to be making more of these YouTube videos. Also, I have many courses for sale on my divination classes on meditation, on tarot and astrology. Divination is one of the amazing tools that helps us navigate times of uncertainty. So if you've been feeling inspired to learn tarot or astrology, just check out my website. And otherwise, everyone, Godspeed. May this new era with Uranus in Gemini usher in amazing breakthroughs and evolutions of our humanity and technology that really support us in creativity and love in really, really beautiful ways. And may we support each other in navigating and ushering in and birthing this new collective renaissance. So be it.